Welcome to the third in our platter series. It's the last one. I wanted to try something a little bit different this time. This is a platter where the corners turn down and support the piece. The bowl in the center is raised off the surface. So in order to do this piece, we required 4 different mountings. First one, a hole here to allow me to shape this side. Second one, a hole here to allow me to shape this side. The third one, a tenon in this area, which allowed me to go back and do this hollowing. That's 3. Fourth one required a vacuum chuck in order to complete this bottom. 4 different chuckings. Not too difficult to turn. The same disappearing wings. High speed still needed. But because of the 4 different mountings, it becomes a little bit more complicated. Let me show you how I did it. First thing I want to do is just mark the centers on both sides. Just by connecting the corners is fine. I'm going to drill a hole from one side only. And the second side I'll drill on the lathe to be sure they are concentric. We'll mark off both sides. I've transferred the general dimensions to the edge of the piece of the wood, so I have an idea how deep each of the 2 holes need to go. And so I'm going to mark them, the hole for the front, the hole for the back, on the piece of wood itself. So when I go to drill, I don't mess up. So I'm going to drill the back side first. Once that's drilled, we'll go to the lathe, mount it on a screw chuck, and drill the other hole through the tailstock. What that does is be sure the 2 holes are aligned with each other. So now I have mounting holes for the face and for the back side ready for the drill chuck. So I'm going to mark out how big around the outside of the bowl area will be on the front. And then just turn the corners down until I have that shape down in kind of a bowl, rounded shape. Good enough for now. Now I'm going to reverse it. The face is going into the screw chuck. And now I have a lot of work to be done on the back side. Get it on nice and solid. I'm using spacing washers. Because of the thickness of the wood, I really didn't need to do that. But it's a good general practice. You notice I have a piece of blue tape on the end of the tool rest, so I do know where the end of that wing is going to be. So if I bang my fingers, it's my own fault. First cut is simply to flatten that area in the center so that in the future, when I have to remount it, I have a nice flat surface. Now I'm going to take a lot of wood out of the center of this to reduce the center height. And because I've just lost my alignment mark, I have to put something on there so I can know where that edge is. And just a piece of blue tape is more than adequate to do that. So now what I'm going to do is continue to reduce the center, half, 2/3. Cleanup cut first to go all the way across the plate. I try to keep my index finger writing against the tool rest so that the tool can be held at a constant distance from the work to make flatter cuts. Once this is trued up and fairly flat, I'm going to start removing mass in the center 2/3 down to the bottom of that hole. Remember, that drill hole was not only for mounting, but was for measuring depth. So I'm going to keep turning away wood until that hole disappears. This is hard maple I'm working with this time, which cuts very nicely, but it does cut slowly as you move towards the center of rotation where there's not much speed past the cutting edge. So we've got down to the bottom. We now have the bottom of the hole found, and that's going to be the bottom of the bowl area when we get that shaped. So now I'm going to start on the outside of that, reducing the wood further so that the wings now come up inside of that dimension. So just keep taking some wood away. Now work from the wing in and work from the center out. And cut both directions. And the reason I'm doing this side second is I now can match the curve, the underside curve, to what's on the top that was done originally before I turned the piece around. So we'll keep taking mass away. And eventually we get to the place that we have the bottom of the cup revealed. I'm using a shallow fluted gouge now to perfect the outside edge of it. It makes a clean cut, and when it gets down to the bottom of that cup area, I can leave a nice sharp corner. So the underside of the wings have been shaped to match the top side. The cup has been defined, and now I have to plan to turn the piece around one more time. So I'm cutting a tenon on the bottom. I'm using a parting tool for the initial portions of this cut. It only has to be about 1/8 of an inch deep. Now once I have it cut, I'm going to go back in with a skew chisel and just make sure that corner is as clean as it can be. It's got to hold this whole project when I reverse it. So there's the tenon that will allow me now to take this out of the chuck and turn it around. But while I still have it held in this place, this is the time to do any cleanup work that has to be done. Sanding underside. We've talked about this in the other videos. I'm using power sanding and making sure I'm only dragging the bottom wing of the sander across the surface. If the top of that sanding disc touches, it'll tear the sanding disc for sure, maybe the piece out of my hand. But once that's sanded, we now can unscrew it from the second chuck. And now what we're going to do is remove the screw chuck, close the jaws down, and remount the platter for the third time. I'm using this in order to go back now and hollow out the inside of the cup area. It's a pretty solid mount. And since I'm working right opposite the chuck, I'm working in a very secure area. Mounted. Checking the thickness every now and then is not a bad idea. So this is what the front looks like. Now that cup area that was identified and has a hole in it to identify how deep it needs to be. And now it's time to make that into a small bowl. So I'm doing standard bowl turning here. It's small, but it's a bowl. And I'm going to shape that down until the bottom of that drilled hole is visible. I'm using a small bowl gouge for doing most of the shaping, but with thin areas like this and deep, I'll probably finish up with a scraper of some sort. So the rough shaping's done. And now going with a small round nose scraper just to clean up that surface, reduce the amount of sanding that has to be done later. Now the sanding that I'm doing with the power sander is simply from that center area around the cup out into the wings. That's an area that hasn't been touched before. So I'm just cleaning up the area from the little bowl area out to the wing. Well, we can't leave it that way. We need to put just a little bit of decoration in place. So I'm going to put a small bead around that opening, and I'm using a 1/8" beading tool from D-Way. I'm going to put it right on the edge. Beads cut with just rocking the tool back and forth. I'm going to leave a little bit of wood on the inside of the tool because I didn't want to tear out any. And so that inside edge will have to be cleaned up one more time. Another negative rake scraper just to take that corner off the inside of where that bead was cut. Well, that's 3 mountings and 3 turnings. And so now I need to put this onto the vacuum chuck. And in order to be sure it's properly centered, I'm putting a live center in the tailstock with a 4-jaw chuck thread on the top of it. I'll take the chuck and the project as a unit, mount it on the tailstock, and this will give me perfect alignment to the axis of the lathe. So that's ready to go, and all I need to do is to take a vacuum chuck, screw it onto the headstock, turn on the vacuum, and advance the tailstock. The piece will be properly aligned. Vacuum's on, piece is in place, and now I simply loosen the chuck and back the tailstock chuck assembly away. Now we're dealing with a piece of cross-grain wood, and no matter how dense the grain is, there's always a certain amount of air linkage, and in this case the cup area has leakage on the end grain areas. The side grain, no air, but I am going to use a piece of tape over the end grain areas where I can feel the suction pulling my finger in. So that's simply to seal that, give me a little bit more suction, a little bit more holding power. If it's on one end grain side, it's on the other end grain side. So a piece of blue tape will be just fine, just to seal up the pores temporarily. Had I finished the piece first, I could have done without the tape because the finish would have plugged those into those pores and it would have been just fine. But this is an unfinished piece and it leaks like a sieve basically in those areas. So now the point is to take a tool and round off the bottom of that cup area, removing the tenon that I had put on there. Once that is removed, then that corner has to be sanded and cleaned up. Once that's sanded, we're going to take the tape off. Just need a little bit of sanding right down near the bottom And I want to be sure that I've blended all the way down underneath where the tape was. Now, while it's still on the vacuum chuck, it's a good time to do some hand sanding. I'm looking for circular marks on the face. I'm looking to clean up the four edges and make sure that everything is as smooth as I can get it while I have something holding in place. So turn off the vacuum and the piece just lifts off. The piece is pretty well done, other than the finish. Now I'm going to seal it up with Minwax wipe-on poly, as I've done on most of my pieces. A couple of coats, liberally applied, wiped down with a blue piece of shop towel afterwards, will give me some seal, and as you can see, it brings the color of the wood out. So I can do both sides at the same time, and you can kind of see how the piece is shaped up. So there's the project. Well, that's the project. It's our last in the series. It was a fun thing to do. It was a little different and turned out to be not as difficult as I thought it would be. I did find a little bit of challenge in trying to get these corners between the curve of the back and the curve of the bottom of the bowl to match up nicely without banging my finger too badly. I did hit myself once. Tape on the tool rest helped a lot. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support. Your questions and comments are always welcome. Come back and see us next time.